Hello guys, David Vose here. Well, it's a beautiful day. See some blue sky and looks like it's going to be another warm summer day. Well, I hope you're having a wonderful day where you are. Again, I turned this thing on with a vague idea of what I want to talk about. I've been having quite a few different thoughts, and I want to run this by you. In this program today, I'm probably not going to give you a lot of archaeological facts or, dramatic quotes from some philosopher or some historian to prove my point. There's a lot of anomalies, and anomalies may not prove something existed that we don't know existed, but anomalies may trigger a sense of a pattern in your mind that if there's enough to this pattern, one begins to doubt things. If you keep feeling a tap on your shoulder and you look around, nobody's there, the first couple times you might think it was just a bug on your shoulder or the wind. Nothing. But if it keeps happening, and especially if it was to happen all day, you might begin to investigate as to whether something was there and they're tricking you. I want to start today by reading you a verse of scripture from the Apostle Paul. I want to read you Titus chapter 1, and I'm going to just do it in the Greek interlinear. So if we come to any words, we could look them up. It says, Paulos, doulos, Theo. Paul, a servant of deity, and apostolos of Jesus, Christo, according to the faith of the elect of deity, the ekleton. Well, that's definitely the right translation, because ekleton or election is the same word that we use today. I don't know why everybody doesn't speak Greek. It's pretty easy. Election. Theo. And you say, yeah, but how would we know that Theo means God? Well, it doesn't. They're fooling you. There is no word God in the Bible. Not one place in the Bible is the word God used. God is a personal name for a Nordic, mythological figure. There were many of these figures. They weren't all called gods. Only one of them. That's a name. But in this case, we have Theo, and Theo is the Greek Attic, ancient Greek Attic spelling, the Athenian spelling of Zeus. And the knowledge of the truth, well, that's not knowledge. That word is gnosin, which is self-knowledge or experience, which is according to godliness. That's fine. In the hope of Zoe's eternal, but that's not eternal. That's aeonia, which is the ages, and which promised, who cannot lie, theos, before chronon or time, aeonian, before the age of time, he revealed now in seasons his own word of him in the proclamation with which have been entrusted I, according to the commandment of the Savior. Now that word commandment is epitagon, and it's not the exact same word that we're going to see here in just a minute. There are lots of words that could mean customs, traditions, judgments, commandments, and they just translate them any way they want to. But that's fine. It's the instructions or the word of the Savior, of us, Theo. That's interesting because according to the Greek grammar there, our Savior, by the way, that is soteros, which was an office held by the Ptolemies for hundreds of years. It's a dignitary or a some kind of a office. And here it is, this Greek Theo, which is the father of all the other deities, which is a little bit like the Elohim named after El, because he's the father. So the deities, or the divine beings, were named after Theo, the father of the deities, Zeus. Now it says, to Titus, my true child, according to our common faith, grace and peace from Theo, Patros, that's the father, and Christo. Now, I want you to understand the significance of this. What does it mean? Why are we calling deity father? We talked about this the other day. Now, we may be talking about the source, as we said, but literally, if you're in those days and you're speaking Greek, you know that the father of these beings that made the world or whatever, or that made civilization and government, the rulers, you know what an archon is. That's what the Greeks called their rulers, archons. Well, they had rulers in the sky. Those were the archons, and the Gnostics talk about it. But if you're going to go around talking about the father, you're not talking about one deity. You're talking about a father of other deities with sons. And in that Greek thought, they're talking about Theos here and Uranus. It's in the Greek text. They're talking about all the things, Tartarus, where the dead go. This is Greek. The river Styx, and on both sides is, the righteous and the unrighteous. And in this Greek mind, they're saying the Father. And then he's got a son, Jesus. An heir. He's got a title, Soteros, like the Greek Ptolemies had. And they were all Christos. And they were all born of virgins. And we talked about that yesterday. Alexander the Great was born of a virgin. The Caesars were born of virgins. The royal bloodline of Rome, Greece, and most any country goes back to a deity. And there had to be a Arios Gamos involved. It was not democracy. It was a theocracy. And then they invented democracy, and we'll talk about that. And that's that kratia, or crazy, democracy, the autocrat, and the democrat, and the theocrat. Okay, what kind of crat or rulership are we going to have? Well, obviously here in the Bible, we've got a man who is the son of, by virgin of being a virgin birth, the son of this father of these, not deities, they didn't call him that. He's the dia, or the father, of the beings in the council, or they called them Olympians, on Mount, in this city that ruled over, it's a capital city that ruled over the rest of the world. But that's Petros, Theo, and Christo, Iso, Soteros, of us. Of this on account I left you in Crete, so that the things lacking you might set in order. Now he's in Crete, and might appoint. Remember, this word is not appoint, but is to point out, to recognize. It doesn't mean to appoint as in an office. But perhaps that's where we get the idea to appoint in offices, not just in the church, but in the politics. We still see this carried over in tradition when they're at Congress and they're like, well, we recognize the elegant speaker, Miss Leslie Bigbottom, and she gets to speak because she's recognized. Today we don't know any of this because we're all apostate. Originally it just meant to find your elders, point them out, recognize them. But it says in every town, elders, not an office, but someone older, as you directed. If anyone is blameless of one wife, now some have said it means at least one wife. But if it was at least one wife, don't you think it would say, here I'm going to give you the instructions of how to find those who are elders that you're going to follow, you're going to listen to, the wise. Let them be blameless. Well, that makes sense. Let them be husbands of one wife. Well, wouldn't it be true that if you had a bunch of wives, You might be not blameless. You might have a harem. You might have slaves on your hand. You might not be showing them the dignity. I mean, where does it say that Adam had more than one wife? The two shall become one. There's no absolute basis for anyone to say they had to have a husband at least of one. It doesn't say at least, and the Greek is very specific when it uses words. It's very specific. And so it's saying you have to have one wife. And therefore the idea that we should be celibate if you're an elder is unscriptural. You cannot be celibate. You cannot be wise or an elder if you haven't had children and raised a family. And that's why it says the children having believing, not under accusation of debauchery or insubordinate. It behooves for the overseer, blameless. Again, here's a word that we think is some kind of a ruler, but one who sees over any project, who oversees or who leads. Now, if I said to you, do you guys have any leaders? You're building a house here. Is there anybody leading the show? I'm not saying this man is God or this man is smarter or he's our ruler. I'm just saying he's leading the project. These are not overtly legalistic terms as we have understood them today. But he should be blameless, to be as deity's steward, meaning he don't own anything. We all just stewards of the Lord. None of us own this earth, but we're all sharing it. See, this is important. You cannot be a Christian. You can't be an elder, that's for sure, if you don't understand that the world doesn't belong to you and that we're not buying and selling the earth and we're not capitalists. We're stewards. That's a fact. Not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not given to wine, not a striker. Well, if we followed these rules, most of the elders of Jehovah's Witnesses wouldn't be elders. Because I've talked to you guys before because my father sat in on elders meetings, this fellowshipping meetings where the elders wouldn't disfellowship someone who was a striker. And what does that mean? A beater? Well, it's talking about given to wine. Well, in other words, drinking a lot of wine, becoming a drunk, and then doing some kind of striking. Well, we're just talking about husband of one wife. And Jesus mentioned those who begin to eat and drink with the confirmed drunkards and then to go beat their fellow servants. So I think this is the word, someone who beats his wife. And we had individuals in Jehovah's Witnesses congregations that did beat their wives and were elders. I know. And they do drink quite a bit. Not greedy of base gain. Now, there's one that disqualifies every elder I've ever seen, or pastor, because first of all, most religious, Protestant preachers, they're employed as a pastor. They're doing it for base gain, for their base pay. And not what Jesus said, to go and not worry about whether you have 2 pairs of sandals, or don't worry about 2 cloaks, or a purse, or any money, what to put on or what to wear. Not to have any thought for tomorrow, for each day brings its own worries. He didn't teach this. Christianity is false, and our entire society is false, and everything we believe is a lie. And I'm about to show you something that it's just beginning to really dawn on me to a point where I cannot overlook it anymore. So he says, but hospitable, a lover of good. Well, I know that sometimes you go to a church and they seem very hospitable. Jehovah's Witnesses seem that way. Mormons. But you understand, they're doing it in the church. That's their job. They're employed to shake your hand at the door. Maybe invite you over for dinner on Sunday. Well, how wonderful. They invited us over to our own home. Allowed us into their home and fed us. Well, that's their job. And only on Sunday would they probably even do that, because that day is required work. And they're supposed to shepherd the flock, and they say they make it a job. And They put on the real smiley face and they're really nice. But it's hypocrisy, because that's not the average person in America, nor the average pastor wouldn't really do anything for you. They'd probably leave you on the side of the road with a flat tire and not stop and help you. And I know Jehovah's Witnesses would do that, because they might be late for one of their meetings, so they can't stop and help you. They'd be going knocking on people's doors to give them the good news of his kingdom, and see somebody poor and hungry, and they don't feed them. They don't give them food. Well, anyway, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined, holding to the, according the teachings, faithful. Okay, so in other words, you can't just believe anything you want, right? We can't just start a church over here and believe what we want, make it up. Well, we're not supposed to start churches anyway, and there's no such thing as church. That's all made up too. The word church just means the ecclesia. It means the gathering. We're supposed to gather in the wilderness. We're supposed to gather unto the Lord, not and get out of the world, right? This is completely not what the Lord wants us to go out and build buildings and cathedrals and temples with gold and lapis lazuli. So you have to stick to the faithful teaching, which today most people have never heard it. You have no idea what the faithful teaching is. It is the logo, the word. That is the new covenant, which the Israelites rejected on Mount Horeb. And they instead received the other covenant, which is these commandments and judgments and ordinances. Now, notice this, that he may be able, he may be, both to encourage with the teaching sound, and those contradicting it to convict. A lot of you think that I should just be nice and not argue with these individuals that are teaching false doctrine. Well, that's not scriptural. We're supposed to convict them because they're contradicting the faithful teaching. There are for many also insubordinate, empty talkers and deceivers. Boy, he points it out, doesn't he? He says a lot of these pastors and teachers and prophets and people that you think you look up to, and kings and emperors and all these guys, they're empty talkers, right? Their talk is empty. They don't know what they're talking about. And therefore they are deceivers. Now notice this, especially those of the circumcision. Now, why is it especially the circumcised, the Judeans? Because they have something that they believe in so strongly. And we were just talking about deception, deceivers, especially the circumcision, empty talkers, insubordinate. And he says, whom it is necessary to silence, who whole households overthrow. Well, that today in our modern times sounds like Jehovah's Witnesses that go in and overthrow households or Mormons or whatever because of their doctrines and their disfellowshipping practices and their divisions amongst people and arguments and false empty talk. And it says they overthrow the teaching, things they not ought base gain. So they're teaching things just for base gain. And they not ought to do it. For the sake of base gain. Now listen to this. Said one of them their own, a prophet, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, gluttons, lazy. The testimony of this is true. For which cause rebuke them. Now, you know he's talking about these Judeans that live in this place called Crete. He says they're lazy and they're gluttons. All right, so they shouldn't be wise elders that we look up to because they're gluttons and they're strikers and empty talkers. So he says we should rebuke them severely so that they may be sound in the faith. Now here's something, people have thought that the word faith meant what you believe, your doctrines, your church. And this is where they get it. It sounds like it says in the faith, like it's some particular faith that we all have that's a regimentary faith, a belief system. But that's not what the word means. It simply means what we believe, what we think is true. And so we have to be sound in our faith inside of ourselves, which is faith in the Lord, not in this world. It's not talking about a set of beliefs. And not giving heed to Jewish, Eudakios, that's Jewish, myths. That's mythos, the myths. And the commandments of men, turning away from the truth. Now, isn't it interesting that he's talking about Jewish myths? What could these Jewish myths be? Some have thought, well, it's the Talmud. They're just talking about commandments of men, not the commandments of the Lord. But you see, the commandments of the Judeans weren't the commandments of the Lord. And it wasn't the Talmud. It was actually the Torah. Because when the Pharisees walked up to Jesus and said, Master, interesting they called him Master, they must have recognized that he was a master, or they wouldn't have done that. They come up to him and they said, a woman dies, she had 5 husbands, and they all died, and then she dies. Who is she married to in the resurrection? And this is part of the Torah, right? And Jesus said, oh yeah, that's the law of deity. You've got to keep all of that. No, he says, no, that's not the law of deity. He says, that's the law of Moses, who out of your hardness of heart gave you those commandments. They're not from our Father in heaven, because it was not so from the beginning. So you see, these commandments are the commandments of men because they're Jewish myths. Now, that's another thing. It's interesting. Not only are the commandments of men, and yet the book tells us they're the commandments of Yahweh. Well, Yahweh probably told them to Moses, and Moses wrote them down. So we call them the commandments of Moses. But and you might say the commandments of Yahweh, but they're not the commandments of the Most High. It wasn't that way from the beginning. And so this is really what Christianity is about. It's a complete opposite of Judaism. The Apostle Paul was against Judaism, the circumcision. So it's interesting that he says 2 different things in the same sentence. And when we look at the fact that he says these 2 things together, we can see that they're both equally the same in authority. That when he says, oh, these Jewish myths, well, obviously we wouldn't follow myths, right? And in the same breath, he says, oh, these commandments of men. And the only commandments he could be talking about is commandments that they believe you have to do in order to be saved. Remember, there may be oral commandments and stuff, but the people that Jesus was talking to, the Pharisees, they believed in the Torah. The Sadducees only believed in the Torah, not the Talmud. So let's not confuse this. He's literally saying we don't believe in these commandments, but we believe in the truth. Now, how do we know that's what he means? Because Jesus said Moses brought the law, but I bring the truth. And he's talking about believing in the truth. It says they turn away from the truth, which is, they turn away from the truth. And if you want to know what he's talking about, look at verse 15. All things are pure to the pure. To those, however, being defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. Instead, they are defiled. They're both their mind and their conscience. So, what is he talking about, pure and unpure? That's according to the Torah, whether things are pure or unpure. Now, we could go on and on with this. This is beautiful. It says they profess to know, however, works they deny him. Detestable being and disobedient, and for any work good, unfit. So they're unfit, these Judeans, in their belief of these commandments of men. But I want to go back Let's go back to this word myth. Judaicos mythos. Jewish myths. We've, I think, proven that the commandments he's talking about are the Judean commandments, the laws of Moses, which talk about being pure and impure and defiled and sinful. But he says, we don't believe in that. If your heart is pure, you're pure. If you have love, you're pure. You don't need any commandments. That's what he's talking about. So what are the Jewish myths? Well, friends, that's what I want to talk to you about today. Is it true that the Jewish history, or we know he's telling us the commandments are of men and we shouldn't follow them. But what is the myth we're talking about? Well, Greek myth is the whole story of Zeus and the Olympians and the Titans and all of that. It's their history, but it's also very mythological, isn't it? Well, so is the Bible. You've got Samson who can pull down a building with his bare hands, and he killed a lion and ripped his jaw open, and with his bare hands, and he killed the bear. I think one of the prophets killed the bear with his bare hands, and David did that, I think. And David killed Goliath with a slingshot. And then there's the flood story, where all the animals in the world, right, gazillion billion species, were put into a boat. I'm not saying this isn't true, the esoteric truth. The Apostle Paul says, we don't go by the letter of the law, we go by the Spirit. What is he talking about? The esoteric meaning. It's holy and true. The esoteric, but not the letter. The letter is the curse and the bondage. So here again, the Apostle Paul is saying that if you look at the Torah and you read it literally, that's not good. Don't do that. Here he's saying Judean myths and people who believed in them. So probably they believed in the flood and fire coming down out of heaven, destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. And they probably believed in Moses' rod turning into a snake. And they thought that was literal. All of that history was literal. But what they didn't know, it was all written in the stars. It was a story, not about the Judeans or the Greeks or the Sumerians. But it's a story which is evidently our history. It's prognostication, it's prophecy, it's astrology, and there's ages, and when each age goes by, it predicts the future. And the stars, it's already written in the stars what's going to happen. And so the story of the Judeans is the story of the stars. Their Abraham is the Egyptian Osiris. But whether he's Abraham or Osiris, it's that star that's up in the sky. And you and I could look at those stars and we wouldn't see a story. So it's not obviously that the stars are telling the story. But somebody had a story from the very beginning. They taught people what the story was and said, look, these stars are telling the story. This is how you can think of these stars. That group of stars is a man with a sword. And then it's like, oh, okay. So who's the man with the sword? Okay, that's a story. And we're going to write it down. And everybody knows what these symbols mean. That's language. And the language is predisposed to tell you what we have planned for you. The language encompasses our plan for you. And we want you to talk and believe this story. But we're going to tell you that the story was your history. Maybe they weren't literally trying to find the Greek history. Maybe that's the whole world to them. And they were giving the world story, but they had certain Greek words that had Greek sounds and symbols that made certain words like theos or whatever. And those symbols and sounds and pictures describe the exact same story that maybe the Sumerians were describing, but they used different symbols and sounds and pictures. And maybe when we go back and look at these two languages, because it was divided at the Tower of Babel, the language, we may see two different stories, because this guy's got a god named Theo and this guy's got a god named Anu, and we're like, well, these aren't the same deities, but maybe they really are. The father of the deities is the same person, and maybe that's, we call them father of the deities, but we really should use the right terminology. There was a father of the Olympians. There was a father of the Titans. There was different things, but they were never called gods. So in our Bible, they're not called gods either. They're called patriarchs. And our father Noah lived 950 years, and we don't know if that's not symbolic of even longer than that. The immortal ones. Now, we have to ask ourselves some questions, friends. I'm trying to find a way to come to some kind of conclusion about thoughts in my head. So, I see some odd things that I've been seeing. I've mentioned a few of them. I noticed that the gods aren't gods to start with, and there is no such thing as God in the Bible or in the Greek myth or in any other forum. There just aren't gods. There's a father of this family of beings, and there's different categories of these beings. They're animalistic. They simply have names that we think, oh, look at this Anu. But that means heaven. So this was a pictograph of heaven. This was a pictograph of earth. This was a pictograph of mountains. This was the deity of fire. This was the deity. And then down the line, they began to have deities like love and eros and, anger and different things. Storms. Okay, so if you knew that beforehand, you'd realize these aren't anthropomorphic muscle men. This is not the Hulk. This isn't the Michelin Tire Man who lives in yonder heaven in the, up in the clouds with rainbows and fairies. This is some kind of a symbol. They're not gods to start with, but they're titans, giants, powers, rulers, and we find that these powers and giants and so forth were the stars. We see Orion's got a sword. We know that's Orion. That's one of the Egyptians call him Osiris. That's Zeus. So then we look at the Greek history and we see that all these, look at Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Who would name their kid? Look at little young Aristotle. Oh, come on, little Aristotle. It's not like they didn't have names, right? I mean, like Bob, Jed, Fred, I don't know, right? What does it mean to be Pythagoras or Socrates? Well, these are the same word we talked about, the Krato. Socrates. He's a ruler. And then we've got Stotle, which is the total, right? Aristotle. Era means the best. So it's the best of all. Why would you name your child very specifically? This is the best of all. This one's the thinker. This one's the idiot. This one. Yeah, some of them, interestingly enough, some of these individuals in their history had names like simpleton. I know, that's not something you would name your child. If we go through all these names, these historical figures, they basically have names such as an idiot, a wise one, an orator, the one who stirs up the trouble, or they have these descriptions, these names that very conveniently fit in with the dialogue to explain government itself or society. Because in society, you would probably have simpletons and you would have ignoramuses. Some of them were called that. Some of these individuals have names like the clergy or the peasants or the rulers, right? The aristocracy, the aristocrats or the aristocracy, and the Socrates that rules over them, or whether it's going to be through love or through wisdom or whatever. It almost seems like it's a story or a creation or a made-up novel describing the utopia or the preferred model. And in the model, you're dealing with simpletons and braggarts and idiots and then philosophy and love and truth, and these things are all interacting. We've got to have this philosophical theosophy that, on the outward appearance of it, it's a story about a family, an imaginary family, let's face it, that is ruling not just your city, but the world. We got wind and mountains and the deep and the rain and the storms and all these things interacting, and how they would interact with each other and how it would play out and what you would need to make order. See, they knew there was such a thing as chaos. So they had a story about what do we do about chaos, and they introduce order. Well, order's got a bunch of brothers, right? He's got law, he's got cleanliness, he's got love and kindness and faith and grace, or whatever. And so they make up these characters and they interact with each other as though it's a family of anthropomorphic beings. Well, I think that's absolutely established. We can see that's what they're doing. But are we saying on the same hand, they're creating this imaginary story based on some realities that happened thousands of years? Maybe they had a father named Adam, or they had a father named Noah. And this is the tradition that's been handed down. We don't know what Noah did, but maybe there was a local flood and he was a hero, and therefore he became more or less the father of all the rest of the people. This is actually generally, basically historical. So we take this Noah and we go to other countries, and now we develop some mythology to help us remember the history. But we don't call him Noah, we call him Anu or something. And we describe all these characters in some sort of play. Okay, we say that because we want to make sure that this is true, literally true. So maybe they based it upon the Bible. But yet now we're also saying, yeah, but they actually based it, the theme and the subject and their actions, the drama, the play, the theater that they're describing is actually the forces of the universe. Friends, they call this history the Divine Comedy. And their history book is a poetical novel written by Ovid. And it would be hardly sane to think that the natural forces of the universe, as they interact, and the negative counteracts the positive, and these two deities keep fighting until creation occurs, and water droplets fall down from the sky and rains upon the earth, and fertility begins, and we create this story of this natural story of Mother Nature, and say, oh yeah, but it's really based on some guy named Abraham. See, I'm beginning to think that we need to know whether or not the story of Adam and Eve and Noah and Abraham is really true, or whether it's just a fiction, just like the myths. And we just read where the Apostle Paul says that the Jews have myths. We know that he says we're not under the law. But most Christians who believe and accept that and don't keep the law, they still somehow believe that these characters were true. You can't talk a Christian out of his literal Noah's Ark and all the animals somehow got in there. Oh, it could be possible, Dave. Oh, yes, it could. It was a big ark. Okay. But it doesn't seem reasonable that the earth, all the species and everything, the things we got on the earth today, all came from one guy in a boat and 8 people. Yes, we see the same story, the Enneads, the Ogdog, everything, they all got the same story, but where'd they get it? From the stars, not from Abraham and Adam and Eve. I think the Judeans went out and made a story based on the story, the sky story, which is this philosophical play that Plato made. I don't know if you've ever read Plato's Republic, but he describes everything I'm talking about, how they designed the universe, the world, the society. You see, we've been told that we've got science, which is people that investigate natural things and determine the laws of physics, and we, through experimentation, we find out for certain, we measure and we find out what reality is. Well, they found out a long time ago there is no reality. We're making it up. And they're literally making it up. So what they did was they didn't just create history from a play or a drama, but it was a play that played logic, that said what would happen if we mixed a little wisdom with a little anger. Whoo! We'd have a problem, then we'd have to have a little peace, and then we'd have to have, and these guys are just anthropomorphic, inanimate energies that are now personified, and we mix and match, and we create a society that we want, where the peasants are slaves and they do what they're told. But not only we are creating society, we're going to create science. We're going to create the universe. We're making the universe. We say what the universe is. We've got names for the wind and the mountains and the moon, and because we've named it and it's personified and we made a play and we wrote it down, that's the holy book, you believe it. But they just made it up. They made up society. They made up the rules. They made up the judgments. They made up the financial aspects. They made up the physics. They just adjust it when they want to, if there's something that they need to change, but they just made up physics, science, even grammar and language. It's all made up. Knowledge, logic is the only thing that they believed in, was logic or the logo. That's why that's the most important thing in the whole world is logic. That's the son of deity. And he rules it all. I know. Yeah, logic or the logo in our Bible is a Platonic philosophical personification in the family of the personified powers that be. Pliny and Philo talked about the logic. It was in the beginning with the deity, kind of like the Sophia. This was philosophy. Not based on people just doing whatever nature lets them do and people taking your crops and other people getting armies together and they fight and all this barbarism. But we're going to be civilized and we're going to run the nation based on reality. And we see that you can't get rid of chaos. Chaos is a deity. It's a fixed ruler. Therefore, we counteract it with order and strict punishment by law. And they had their grounds, their philosophy. Like today, they've got the idea of utility, not of value like morality. But if it's useful, if you can be utilized, it is good. If it is not utilizable, it is bad. There's no way to say that heterosexuality, therefore, is a utility. In their mind, if they want us to all be slaves and not produce more children and just follow along, be good little effeminate subjects, then they're going to want a lot of people being born and having their organs removed and playing out fantasies in a biotech world. And so it's better the utility of nobody gets married, nobody has fun, we'd all just stay in our houses and play on our phones. But Plato said what they were going to do. They created a society. And I wonder if they didn't create the history to back it up, to say, oh, look, we came from a guy named Adam or whatever, and he had a kid, and he had a kid, and this guy went through the flood, and this is our history. We just made it up. There's no actual literal history. There is no Zeus. There is no King David. There was no Solomon. You say, wait a minute, Dave. Weren't there findings of megaliths? Didn't we unbury pyramids from the sand? Didn't it tell us on the pyramid walls what they were? Don't we know all of this stuff? That there was a Solomon? That there was a King David? Isn't he inscribed somewhere on a rock? Well, I got to thinking about that. And I thought, man, how convenient, you know. They tell us that this proves that because this is true. And we just assume this is true, but it's not true. And we forget that we've got to examine everything. Maybe there are no stars with planets flying around them light years away. Maybe they've lied to us because I have never heard an explanation as to how they can know how far they are. I've talked about this. I think it's a hoax. I don't believe that we know what the moons and the planets and the stars are. I'm not saying we're living on a flat earth because that would be ridiculous for me to pick out some other fantasy, discard one fantasy and come up with another, right? We have no clue what this world is that we're living in. We may be living in a computer simulated program. Okay, at least we could postulate that for the time being. But what we're going to do here is we're going to find out what's really going on. What is the real truth? There's going to be so many twists and turns in this. I think we're going to have to do 2 or 3 videos on this to get to the bottom of it. Maybe more. Because we're going to literally disentangle every piece of misinformation, every lie, every deception. And we're going to pull it off, stomp on it, and bury it in the ground. And we're going to get back and look at what we got, what's left. And ask ourselves if what's left proves anything like the story that we were told. I have come across quite a bit of information that is puzzling me, and I want to start just by saying that the first thing that puzzles me is when I found out that the deities aren't deities and they're anthropomorphisms of nature. And people know that and move right on down the line and talk about them like there's some, I don't know, some powerful star being or something. We look at the Old Testament and we say, yeah, it was made in 6 days. The earth and the heaven were made in 6 days. And they say, well, that's impossible because the sun wasn't made till the 4th day. So, well, it's true even if we can't understand it. Well, yeah, it is true. And I'm not saying I don't believe in this ancient wisdom. It was written in the stars, for goodness sake. I'm just saying I also believe all scripture. And Paul says it's myth. And we shouldn't get caught up in myths. And these commandments are the commandments of men. That's all I'm saying. And I'm saying Plato and Socrates and Aristotle and Aristobulus and the medic industry with their little serpent on a pole thing. The symbol of medicine is a serpent. I know. Poison, sorcery. What is all of this? What was their plan? So, I find that before the 1800s, we didn't have any of these Babylonian tablets. We didn't have Egyptian understanding. We couldn't read the hieroglyphs. We didn't have the cuneiform. We didn't have any of these Dead Sea Scrolls or Nag Hammadi Library. Isn't it interesting that at about the same year, they miraculously found the Nag Hammadi Library? Hundreds of these little books. Oh, we forgot to tell you, you got more books in your Bible that you didn't get to read. Oh, yeah, and these tell you something different, right? Something, it opens possibilities up that's crazy, right? Oh, and at the same time, we found these Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah, they're written in Hebrew. Of course, we've proven now that they were written as a translation of Greek, that the Bible was written in Greek, not Hebrew, and that these Hebrew writings were just translations from the Greek, and it was just a made-up Aramaic Hebrew kind of script that these Talmudic Jews made up because they were up in Syria. They had fled the destruction of Jerusalem, and they made up this language today we call box letter Hebrew, not the old paleographic Hebrew, which we, it's just pictographs, which we probably didn't even know what it meant till we got the Rosetta Stone. Do you know what that means, friends? If the Bible wasn't written in Hebrew, but it was written in Greek, and we now have proof of that, whether or not people want to accept it or whatever, the evidence is there that these Hebrew Dead Sea Scrolls were translations of the Greek. Now, if that's true, and it is, then the Old Testament and the New Testament were written around the same time. The Greeks took over in 300 BC. We got the story that the Sanhedrin met, the 72, and they made the Old Testament. But we're told that they translated something. I wonder if they were translating the records in the stars, or if they were translating all the, the source material, whatever this is, that I guess every other nation used, and their translation was their story. So we've got an Old Testament, a New Testament, a Horeb, a Sinai, a divine father, and a devil. It seems like this book we call the Bible was written around 250 BC, 280 BC. Written in Greek, not in Hebrew. We know the story about the Septuagint, the 72 who translated it. We know they did it supposedly around 280 BC. That's when Greek was universal all around the world. We don't have any records. If you go down to the Elephantine in southern Egypt, there were a whole group of Judeans that was exiled there. And they had their beliefs, and you can read these books and papers there, but they don't have any mention of Yahweh. These Judeans, these exiles, living in Egypt, down in Elephantine, Egypt, had no writings or books about the Torah or Yahweh. That wasn't part of their belief. And this was like 400 or 500 BC. So the only mention of this Old Testament starts around 280 BC, which is when we got the Greek version of it. What I'm saying is that I believe the Bible was written by the Alexandrian priests at the city of Alexandria. The Greek priests and philosophers themselves encapsulated history, or this story in the sky, into this, what they would want for history, our knowledge of who we are, that was going to be given to the peasants. And the Greek side you learned in the university, and that was for the higher uppers, the elites. That's how they learned how we're here and who we are. They would have a divide. And today, if you go to college, you learn about the Greek mythology. But if you're a peasant, you go to church and learn about Abraham. Oh, wow, how convenient. In the 1800s, we start digging up, oh, look at this big old rock. It's got all this cuneiform. We never saw that before. Oh, and we need translators. Well, darn it, the peasants don't know how to translate. Let's translate it for them. You're our slaves. You'll continue to do what we say. The history we made up, oh yeah, we verified it. Oh, isn't that convenient? We verified it. We dug up a city, and look at this weird city just standing there. It's like a more complicated than anything we could do today, right? And it's still standing after 5,000 years, right? And yet, we come to America, and there's nothing standing anywhere. There's very little of any of this. Well, maybe it's because anything that was in ancient times would be completely gone, eroded, corroded, buried beneath the sand hundreds of feet. And actually, that's something they don't tell us either. The earth's growing. I mean, the mulch and the leaves and the branches and the grass and the space dust, the earth's crust gradually grows. And over 1,000 years, you've got like 100 feet of soil that's covered the city. This is why they've got underground places, because the ancient civilizations are underground. And so a lot of these tunnels were just made thousands of years ago. They're ancient cities, but you don't see them on the surface. And so these ones that they're telling us about over there on the surface, they're just going out there, and when nobody's looking, they're making them out of plaster Paris and then saying, oh, look, we've uncovered something. But man, all over the place in the Middle East, we got these megalithic buildings, wonders of the world. And they dug them out of the sand. How do we know if they didn't just make it out of plaster of Paris like they did Chalago? I have seen pictures and proof now, and I'm not going to put them here in this video, but I'm just going to let you know that I've been seeing these pictures, and I've looked at some of this evidence, which we're going to cover in another video as we go along here. But I will show you a couple of pictures here. There is a new theory that all of this was here in America, and all this started coming out when we had the Wild Wild West, the 1800s, when we started exploring America, and they found these mounds and they found these precious things. Now, what's interesting is a lot of these ancient artifacts that they find in the Middle East are made out of copper. And there's a lot of copper jewelry and stuff that they found in the Assyrio area around the Euphrates River. Well, they forgot to tell you that there are no abundant resources of copper. There's very little copper in that area. And so the ancient ones couldn't use copper from that area. They didn't have enough of it. They had to add to it iron or some other metal, tin or something, and make brass. But it's common knowledge that here in America, there is all this copper just everywhere. The largest copper mines in Utah. There's pictures in some of these places, like in Assyria, on the cuneiform, where a man is down on the ground with a bow and an arrow shooting up into the trees, killing a monkey. Well, that ecology doesn't exist in Assyria around the Tigris and the Euphrates. It exists in South America. So we have a great deal of information that maybe when they came to America looking for the 7 cities of gold, they found all that stuff. But they didn't want anybody to know it was from here. So at the very same time, they had some archaeologists saying, oh, hey, we found it over here in the Middle East. And they show us this megalithic statue, like 20 feet high, with engravings and everything. It's amazing, right? Now, the peasant, you and I, wouldn't know. They say it's made out of alabaster. We wouldn't know that that is like chalkstone. And it wouldn't survive more than 20 years. And if it fell over and was laying in the ground upside down or on its side, like they found it, they said, it would be broken into many pieces. And any wind or water would erode it completely away. And yet they've got these statues they say are 2,500 years old that they found in Assyria with the winged gods and stuff. And they're made out of chalkstone, is what they're saying. Of course, we don't know because we don't get they were in a museum somewhere. We don't get to inspect them. Oh, you can go and look through the glass. Oh, there it is. It's real. But it may be just made out of chalkstone or cement. We have found proof now. Not too long ago, there was these terrorists, I don't know, the Al-Qaeda or ISIS or something, were going into these sacred areas and taking these sacred statues and busting them and destroying these artifacts. Well, what they didn't tell us, there's pictures of when they destroyed them, they weren't real. They were made out of plaster of Paris or cement and rebar, and they were hollow, and they just were fake. So where did they get this beast-looking thing with wings and this Assyrian soldier on the front? It's 20 feet tall. Where did they get this picture? Well, recently they've discovered in America, literally made out of copper, pure copper. See, there was a man that was, I think, a Catholic bishop or something, a priest, and he knew the native peoples down in South America and in the Amazon. And they got to trusting him and they loved him because he helped them out a lot. And they would bring him these little statues and jewelry and all stuff made out of copper. And one of the things they had brought him was this figurine that was the perfect exact figurine that was now 20 feet tall, made out of plaster of Paris, over in Iraq, that they claimed they dug up out of the sand, and it was some real artifact, until the ISIS Al-Qaeda terrorists got a hold of them and beat them up and showed that they was fake. So you talk about things that just happen. I mean, like, we just happen to believe that we went to the moon, even though there's no evidence that we did go to the moon. But we wouldn't even know that there was a moon. I mean, we have to conceive of what the moon is to even think we could go there. It could just be a picture in the sky. We don't know. We don't know what the heck is going on. But they're saying, no, it's a moon, and that's like a planet, but it's a smaller planet, and we don't know, there might be water up there, and it's an Earth like ours, and we get to believe in all this. And they're telling us how far it is to that moon. How would we know? How would we know? And then they tell us, well, there's a wall of energy or fire that we've got to go through called the Van Allen belt that we can't get through. They've admitted that many times. And then they've got the other evidence or the propaganda going on that they did go through it. So either their lies get tripped up and they have to make different excuses. But the point is that it's lies based on lies. We don't know if the speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. How did they gauge it? With little photons in a box flying around? They can't see photons. Well, they measure it, Dave, with gamma rays or something. I don't know. I don't believe them. I honestly don't believe that they can do any of the things that they say they can do. These rocket ships they have are probably not even that great because we've never seen them. If they had something like that, they'd probably show it to us, right? They wouldn't have anything to lose because they had that kind of power. They would be like deities, and there's nothing we could do. Why would they hide it from us? They would just say, look, we're the Lord, and you get down and worship. But no, they don't ever do that. They keep us in this deception. I say that Plato did what he said he was going to do, created a republic. And that's why any college anywhere around the world, they talk about Greek mythology and biblical studies. If you go to college, you can learn biblical studies or you can learn Greek mythology, but you don't learn African mythology, or you don't learn Chinese history or Brazilian history. In fact, we've eradicated whatever history there was in America. We say, oh, there was nobody here, just some, Aboriginal tribes. They had no civilization. They lived in teepees. Well, those were the refugees, because before we got here, they had already come over and wiped them out. But what kind of cities did they have? Well, the Amazon jungle in 50 years covers, the forest just grows over everything and it disappears. They've taken infrared and they've seen that there was a vast, vast civilization under the Amazon. And I believe there was a vast civilization here. But something happened. There was a war. The Book of Mormon talks about it. Maybe there's more here than we've been told. Let me show you a picture. Look at what they found at the bottom of Lake Superior.
Mega mound site. The main reason for this suggestion is surely due to the feature's similar shape and form when compared to ancient Native American earthworks. Not only are the earthen walls similar, but the perceivable openings correlate with many Native American mounds from the vicinity. The openings were many times aligned to astronomical events. The main problem with this theory is, of course, the size of the anomaly. At 3 miles long by 2 miles wide, it would be the largest ancient mega mound site in the world.
2 to 3 miles wide. That is bigger than any city we have. You probably have seen this picture before. This is from Plato's Republic. And the Atlantic Ocean is probably where Atlantis was. Could the center city of Atlantis have been Lake Superior? Well, here's another interesting island or anomaly. It's up in Canada. Yeah, look at this. This is Quebec. Okay, so there's Maine and New Hampshire and New York, right? Right above Montreal. This is Quebec. Go in here and already you can see there's this strange round island here. Ecological reserve, huh? Isn't that neat? A perfectly round. It literally fits the description of Atlantis. Of course, it's been there for a long time. I'm sure the water has eroded some of it and stuff, but it's just right there above New York. But if there were cities here, they may have hid them in order to distort our true history. Now, I'm not saying or trying to start a new idea that this is Atlantis there in that spot, but there is certainly cities under the ocean in Lake Huron, Lake Superior. There's a great deal of anomalies and stuff, but that's really not my point. But my point is that we think they have these big ruins in the Middle East, and they've dug up these cities, and we're finding now that these ruins were made recently with plaster of Paris or cement, and they're literally deceiving us. And we actually do have proof that some of these artifacts or the mold for them was found here in America. So we really don't know anything about history if they've been faking it for the last 200 years. And if they've been faking it, what is the reason? And that leads us to the question of, if we don't have a God and we don't want to believe in the Nephilim or the Titans or the Archons, and we know they're just imaginary figures anyway, is the story of Jesus true? That's what we got to get to the bottom of, and I'm going to show you the beautiful truth and why history is what it is, and what they're doing, and what they're trying to pull off, and what's about to go down here in the Great Tribulation that's coming. But we got to examine some of the facts. So we'll go further in the next video tomorrow, and we'll get to some very important information. I'm going to go ahead and go. Hope you have a wonderful evening. Lord will bless you. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a good one.